You're listening with Anne Warren and Good Life Drive. I have the great honour of introducing my next guest. Fifa Riccobono is the former CEO of Albert Music. In fact, Fifa worked with the iconic Albert Music label for almost 4 decades. She worked with the cream of Australian artists, including AC/DC and John Paul Young, and was a director for APRA, AMCOS, AMPAL for 15 years, and as if she didn't have enough on her plate, she also worked tirelessly as director for Nordoff Robbins Music Therapy for 10 years. Fifa's now an independent music industry consultant and continues to consult to Albert Music, and of course also has her own publishing company, Viola Jade Music. On Tuesday night at the APRA Music Awards, Fifa received the Ted Albert Award for Outstanding Services to Australian Music, and named after the man who gave her start in the music business, made it all that more special. It is my great pleasure to welcome my dear friend Fifa Riccobono. Thanks for joining us, Fifa.
Thanks for such an intro, Annie. It's lovely to be with you.
Well, I had to give you the intro, just for some of the listeners that may not know the whole background, because you've been in the industry for so long, but you've also been on all of those boards, thousands of hours of work, man.
Always enjoyed what I do, and I always want to learn more. Everything I did, I was encouraged to take on more, and I found that the more I knew, the more I wanted to know. So I started out as a 16-year-old junior, a very naive 16-year-old junior, and I worked my way through the promotions department, and from the promotions department to the A&R department. I was label manager, I was manager, and then I was general manager, and eventually I worked up to CEO. And during that time, whilst I'd let some things go, the majority of work remained the same, but it was really important to be on the boards that I was on, because they were the boards that, form policy and work with government on, trying to find ways of protecting the rights of the writers and the artists. So for me, it was just as important a part of my job to be on those boards and learn as much as I needed to, so that I was always aware of what changes were coming, so that we could be, well armed to defend our rights and the rights of our artists and writers. So I loved my time on the APRA board. It was always the majors, we always felt, had a bit more clout than the indies, but the indies had a lot of grunt, and they never got their directives from overseas, from an overseas parent company. They had to really make that themselves. So we didn't have a formula. We had to create all of that ourselves and go overseas and sell ourselves, whereas, the majors would have their particular parent company in one of the overseas countries, and that gave them a lot of abilities to go in and open doors. We had to go and knock the doors down ourselves.
Now, I did say it was the Ted Albert Award. And of course, how special was that on Tuesday evening?
Well, it was very special and very emotional, because I worked with Ted for 20 years, and then I left for a very short time because I felt that I'd done nothing other than work in the industry and wanted to see if there was something outside of music. And I went to work for a boat charter company in Darling Harbour, a lovely family down there, and had the time of my life for 2.5 years. I felt like I was on holidays every day. And sadly, Ted Albert died during that time, and he actually died on my birthday, which I felt was very significant for me. Still kept in touch with the company. I still felt, very much tied to it, even though I wasn't involved. And so when he passed away, I just thought, I had to be there. Not someone, I had to be there, because I want to look after my label, I want to look after my writers, I want to look after the songs that we'd worked on, all that time together. I was asked to come back after he passed away, and I didn't hesitate for a second. I jumped in and said, absolutely, and I went back and I stayed for another 20 years. And it's been, incredible, the time with Alberts. I've loved working there, and I've worked with 3 generations of Alberts now.
Now, we've got a lot of ACD fans here at the station, as there are around the world, and you were very much a hands-on during the early days of AC/DC.
Yeah, sorry, Anne.
No. Go, tell us, I just can't imagine nowadays they have such a posse of security guards around them that the music person wouldn't be that close to the musician, but you were there right next to them the whole way. Yeah?
Well, in the beginning, it was very different. I mean, when you're, just starting out in the industry and you're, trying to work up, the fan base and all the rest of it, the record companies and the publishing companies are very important to you. And I had a very good relationship with the bands. When they were signed to us, one of the comments I've always made that I think is really a vital difference between the majors and the indies is that when an indie gets hold of an artist or a writer, they look after them from inception. So you have them from the cradle right through to the end.
Their family,
and you hope that the end is the top of the charts. And during that time, you become very attached to them because you go through, as I said, the inception right from the early stages. And I went through all the photographic sessions with them, the video shoots with them, working out their album covers, doing their biographies, working through them with scheduling for tours. We did all of that in the early days. But as it gets bigger, it's a much bigger animal, and there have to be more people involved. And again, the bands could just walk around quite easily. But I'll give you an example of something that happened once that when we were in Rio, rocking in Rio in 1985, and it was a fantastic, venue that they put on, and loads of overseas artists came in for it. And we had just got off the plane, and I was with Angus and with Cliff, and I think it was one of the other Albert people. And they were just taking us out from the airport, the back of the airport, down into a car, and there was a whole group of fans that were waiting on the wings, and they saw Angus, and they ran. And it was like, we're talking hundreds. And when you're near something solid, like what happened was the tour manager grabbed Angus and threw him in the car and said to the driver, go, so that it was sort of, so the fans would dissipate. But what actually happened was they kept coming, and we were right in the middle of it. And so they actually, I almost felt, well, I did feel terror because I could feel the crush coming, and that's what happens. So the reason that you have to have security around is when you get to the level where kids go berserk, you have to keep someone there that keeps them safe, but also keeps you safe. But I was squashed between the back of the car and the fans, and it was frightening.
You got caught in the firing line.
Absolutely, part of my job.
Yep. Now, after working with Albert Music for near 4 decades, you've got to have some of those special moments that really stand out. Would you like to share some with us?
Yeah, I
know we haven't got hours to
No.
spare. But
I mean, if I was being realistic, there were probably at least 2 or 3 every year.
Yes.
If we added that up over 40 years, we'd be here for the duration.
Yes.
But I'd say some particular highlights were Stevie Wright's performance at the Sydney Opera House in 1979 when we did the 2SM Concert of the Decade. He had been in rehab for some time, and he'd been clean for 3 years, but he hadn't been on stage. And so it was really, really, I was freaked out to the hilt because I thought, he hasn't been on stage for such a long time. And he came out, and there was so much love in the audience for him. The crowd just went berserk when they saw him, and he delivered the most amazing rendition of Evie, the 11-minute, part, 3-part single. And I just could not believe how it seemed so effortless, but the performance was just outstanding. So that was one real major highlight. Another one was probably about 7 years ago. I can't even remember. I was with Malcolm and Angus, and they were here in Sydney, and the Stones had come into town, and their tour manager was one of AC/DC's old tour managers from the 80s. And he rang and he said, do you think Malcolm and Angus would like to come up to the show? And Keith would love to see them. And I said, I don't know. They're in the middle of writing at the moment. So I mentioned it to Malcolm and Angus. They went, no, thanks very much, but we're writing at the moment. And I said, well, look, it's not till tomorrow night, so why don't I call you again tomorrow and we'll see how you feel about it.
Feeling.
And it was really quite sweet because I rang the next night and they sort of said, oh, well, thought we might just pop up. And so we went backstage. I took them in, and our old tour manager came and got us and took us into Keith Richards' dressing room. And it was unbelievable. I mean, Keith was so excited to have Malcolm and Angus in his dressing room, and then Ronnie came in, and Marion Faithfull was in there as well. And quite honestly, if I'd taken drugs in the 60s, I would have thought I was having a flashback because it was just so unbelievable. And so, I mean, I was just overwhelmed. Yeah. And, you know, and then we went out the front and we were watching the show, and Ronnie had said before we went out, you know, do you think the guys would get up? And Malcolm had said, oh, look, we'll just see how you're going, see how things go. And so we went out the front, and I looked at the tour manager, and we looked at each other and he said, what do you think? I said, I've got no idea which way it's going to go. But Angus and Malcolm said they were just popping out for a cigarette. And then 5 minutes later, I hear Mick say, welcome Angus and Malcolm. And there they were on stage. And it became a guitar band because you had Ronnie and Malcolm and Keith and Angus. And I saw Malcolm look over at Charlie Watts, and the biggest grin on Charlie's face, and Malcolm sort of went, take it, and Charlie took it, and they did Rock Me Baby, and the crowd hadn't realised who was on stage because Angus had never been on stage without his, or never
school
goes on
uniform.
stage without his school uniform. He just got up in jeans because came over in jeans, and the crowd went mental, and I was just I was overwhelmed. It was so good. And so that was another wonderful highlight.
Yeah. They were all in guitar heaven, darling.
Oh, honest to God, it just became... if you'd seen Keith was so excited. It was just wonderful. And many times, you know, things that have happened with JPY over the years, because he was king of pop in the 70s, and he had this beautiful shirt that he was wearing on Countdown. And I said to him, John, when you finish with that shirt, can I have it? And he said, when I come back from Countdown, you can have it. I really loved it. I think it was a John and Maryvale shirt. Mm-hmm. Back then it was very fashionable, and I didn't realise that when he got to Countdown that there were going to be all these mad screaming girls, and what they did was they actually tore the shirt off him. They tore it off him in, you know, many, many pieces, and he came back with cuffs, the shirt cuffs, and that was all I had of the shirt.
Can I tell you, I've seen that replay on, you know, the greatest moments of Countdown.
Oh, really?
That was, and I mean, you talk about how you need security now, and that's why.
Well, I ended up with cuffs and no shirt. But, and then obviously worked with John again when Strictly Ballroom, the movie, came out. So I have lots of fond memories with John, and Lovers in the Air has played a huge role in our lives because it was one of Vanda and Young's, you know, most successful singles of all time. Has been covered by hundreds and hundreds of artists worldwide, and it's an evergreen. You know, you can never get sick of it. When that song comes up, everybody just wants to get up and dance. Yeah. Everybody wants to do a conga line. You know, it's just that type of song.
It's a happy song.
Very happy song.
And of course, you've just mentioned George and Harry, the most iconic songwriters in the history of Australian music. What was it like working so closely with them? And I mean, it wasn't just for 1 or 2 days, it was for decades.
Yeah.
What's a typical working day?
Working with George and Harry always started off with a gallon of coffee beforehand. I used to make teas and coffees for the planet, and I used to love it. You know, I would make part of my job was to keep everybody in caffeine. I didn't realise it wasn't in my job description. But once they got into the office and started to work through ideas and everything, they'd go down to the studio, and I'd often walk in when I knew that they were well into something that I, you know, really go and listen to. And I used to love to hear things in their early stages when they were building them, you know, and putting parts down, and they were absolute craftsmen. You know, when it came to songwriting, there were no better songwriters or you know, someone that could teach you the structure of songs. There was no one better than George and Harry. When it came to actually playing, they were both musicians and very, very fine musicians. Harry was is a brilliant guitarist, and George could play anything you put in front of him. Yeah. So, you know, when they were writing songs, you know, George would be on drums or on piano, or, or bass, whatever was required, he could do it. So they were really, really talented musicians, and they could pick the weaknesses in a band or in an act quickly. When someone came in, they'd see there's, it's lacking in the bass, or it's lacking, the drummer's not really good enough for what they want to achieve in that. So that's a real art, that is.
Yep.
And then on top of that, they worked in the UK for the best part of 4 years before coming back, and they'd honed their production skills in the UK. So they came back with a lot of knowledge on the latest, in studio technology and things. And so they were the first to really, experiment with so many things here. And because they were such strong songwriters, they had loads of songs, but no vehicle really for them. But their heart was in rock and roll. So their songs were more pop, but the productions were much more rock. So they married that with getting artists in like J.P. White, who had a great voice that could, work really well with a lot of their songs, and William Shakespeare back then, and Stevie Wright. They wrote for Stevie. And that, but then they started bringing in the rock acts, and they started that after the Stevie, when Stevie was no longer recording with us. They went into the next act we had was AC/DC, which had George's two younger brothers in it. And, from day one, they really helped them work through songs. Yeah. They wanted them to be able to write their own material, so they helped them with songs. They did the recordings, then they had Rose Tattoo, then they had the Angels, and they had the Choir Boys, they had Cheetah. Wow. We had loads of artists that they just really, from day one, they wanted them to be able to write their own songs. So they would come in with ideas, and then they would sit down and help them structure them. Working with them and watching what they did. They were very, very generous with their time, with their knowledge. Yeah. They really helped a lot of the engineers that started out at Albert's. There were quite a lot that they spent a lot of time with and gave them a lot of assistance. And they went on to become producers in their own right. They were just really, really talented people.
Yeah. And we're talking about technology, and obviously that's really, new technologies obviously had a big impact on the music industry. What would be the main advantage of having, such easy access to music?
Well, first up, the technology has changed for recording as well. But, everyone thinks that you can just record in your bedroom, and you probably can, but there's certain things that you just can't do there that you really need, larger studios for. The things that have changed over the years of going from analog to digital, a lot of people found that a much harsher way of doing things. They felt there was much more warmth in the analog recordings, and, but things have improved all the way around. And back when it was in the early days, you didn't have immediate recall on your your desks. You'd have to reset everything all the time and mark up everything. Whereas with a computerized recording desk, you can leave it tonight and tomorrow it'll be exactly the same. And even if someone's touched it, you could get it back to where it was instantly. So there were a lot of things that helped. In relation to the actual downloading, and where people
social
don't
media,
buy, where people don't buy recordings. It's funny because there's quite a few artists that's still out there because of the way because one, they've got a very strong fan base, and because of the way they package their CDs. A lot of the bands still sell CDs because their fans want to have something to hold. They want to see. They want the booklet, they want the story, they want all of that. So
exactly.
They still buy. AC/DC is one of those artists. Those that have grown up, say the last 15 years, that's alien to them, and they only want
totally different
downloads. They want to be able to get something on their iPods, iPads, or iPhones, or whatever other, device they have, and they want it instantly. It's a lot more disposable, and, we really thought about it when we bought records for $30 back.
Oh,
back
yes.
When.
That was an investment.
Yeah, and you kept it and you loved it and you wanted to hear the whole album. You didn't want to hear one track. You loved the artist. You wanted to hear the whole album. Well, now because, it's so single-orientated or one track, there's a different, a different feeling of it out there. People just want to buy one track or two tracks, and they're even reluctant to pay $1.60 for something that, they love. They want. I always say to anyone that says, that they're pirating and they shouldn't have to pay so much for music and what have you. And I think, but you really like this song, love it. Well, you really love this song, and the best way you can pay the artist back and the writer back is by stealing it.
Yeah,
that's right. By telling them that it's not worth anything, but you really like it and you want to play it, and it's going to make a difference at your party tonight. But you don't think that you should, reward the people who actually created it. That is what they do for a living. It's not as if it, that is what they earn from.
Yeah. And that's what you were doing in the background with AMPRA and AMCOS.
Yes, well, we try
you're lobbying government for greater protection.
Yeah, and there are a lot of good things happening there in online that is supporting the industry, and there are things that aren't. And it's a real the income streams have changed dramatically because the recording. The recording royalties that were there years ago don't really exist in the same way, and the bands usually make it more from live performances and merchandising, but it made it a bit tougher, and there'll be the superstars, but there's a big gap between the superstars and the next tier.
Yeah.
A lot of the middle section has gone. There's not, it's rather either doing extremely well like the Beyoncés or the Gautiers, or then you're on the lower rung. And sometimes you see a lot of things being promoted and everything, but it doesn't really mean that they're making a lot of money.
That's right. And I mean, we won't go back too many decades, but I can remember tagging along with you when you were scouting for new talent and seeing live bands, whereas now, these days, more and more artists are launching their own careers simply by uploading a music video. Do you think that that sort of technology is helping or hindering the companies finding that standout talent?
Well, because things have changed dramatically and there are a lot more artists who don't rely on getting a record company involved or whatever, the reality is in the early stages you can do most of that yourself, but when it gets to a level that's a little bit further, when you get some traction and start to get
you
some
need
success,
protection.
Well, it's not just protection, but you do need people to be able to work it. And so whether you go to a registered, publisher or not is neither here or there. Someone still has to do that job. So if you're saying, I'm not going to a publisher because I don't want to, give part of my royalty away, then you've got to put someone on who's going to look after that for you. Yeah. And the same with, your record label. What does happen is when artists can get some traction themselves and they can go to a record company may not listen to them because they don't want to develop artists because it takes too long, it's too costly, and the industry has changed, dramatically in that regard. So what happens is if an artist can say, look, I've got a fan base of 30,000, here's my website, I know we can do X, Y, Z, then there's every chance the record company will say, hey, all right, well, you've already started the ball rolling. We can take it from here. So you'll get interest from a publisher or interest from a record company. So in that regard, it does help artists.
Good springboard, yeah.
Yeah. And others, it depends on how successful they want to be and what they want out of life. They might just like doing a gig on a Saturday night, and selling 20 records that night. That might be what they want, and it's perfect for them. Yeah. But, if you really want to springboard into an international market and all of that, it takes a lot more planning, and usually you need a few champions behind you who are there to support you and help you through it.
Yeah. Now, I have to talk about this because, of course, gender equality in the workplace, it's always a hot topic. Now, you were the first female CEO of a record label, and that's no mean feat. So being a woman at the top in a man's industry, an advantage or disadvantage?
Well, I never saw it as either, and I was actually the head of the music company, which wasn't just a label; it was the whole publishing. It was all of Albert Music, and I felt very confident in what I could do, and I think that is the big thing. One of the things I would say to anybody is, don't use being a female as a crutch because you give away your strength instantly, and you've got no power. I didn't see it as advantage or disadvantage. I just did the best I could at learning what I could about my business, and the more I learnt, the more I wanted to learn, and I made myself indispensable. And I was encouraged by everybody in my company, the first being Ted Albert, and then George and Harry, to move up the ladder So I can't say that outside of my company it certainly did exist, but I didn't have an issue because I had my company's backing.
Yes.
And I knew what I was talking about. So I think anybody that really works at what they, if you walk out and you want to stand head and shoulders above the rest or alongside of the rest, then you've got to be able to compete with them. And you can do that, whoever you are, female or male, it makes no difference. The fact that I was female, I was absolutely amazed that I was the first. I only found that out when they were doing all this thing for my award the other night, that I was the first female CEO. And I kept saying to them, well, I can't believe that, and I think you may have that wrong. And I've asked them to go and check
You're a trailblazer.
I've asked them to go and check that at least 3 times, and they said, look, we've checked, and this is what it comes out as, that you are. So I'm thrilled, I'm amazed. It just happened, but I did work hard at what I did.
You did. And I know you did, because there were years when I would only see you once or twice because you were overseas. You were working your little butt off.
Yeah, well, I went overseas every year for 2 or 3 times, sometimes with the artists and sometimes just to go to the conventions and to, liaise with all of our associates overseas. So, there was some good... obviously there's a lot of fun involved in it as well. When you get to a level where you can walk in, it's not always a struggle. One of the things I said, I remember starting out with all the bands in the very early days where we literally stayed in hotels that were cockroach infested. And it was just scary. I mean, I'd stay in hotels that didn't have locks on their doors, and I'd be sleeping with one eye open and the chair underneath that door handle, so in case someone tried to push in. So we did all of that together, and we grew through that and went up to, started off at really, 2-star accommodation, and thank God, we managed to get back up to, we got up to 5, which was lovely. But we did it together.
Yes.
I loved working with the bands. I mean, I went to all their shows. Anything that our bands were involved in, I was always part of. It was part of my life, but I really loved doing it.
I know you had the dream job, Fifa.
Oh, I did, and I don't ever deny it.
No.
I had the dream job, and I worked with the dream team. God, wouldn't anyone have given their left arm, right arm, and what not to work with George and Harry? And I was there at the ground level with them and worked with them for just over 30. Well, I've known them now for 42 years, and I still hold them in very high esteem and regard them as my friends.
Yeah. Now, and look, finally, you're still consulting for Albert's to this day.
Correct.
But you have your own publishing company. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now?
I have a small publishing company that I have, and it represents a lot of music that goes into films for TV programs and that. And I work with a company in the UK, Accorda Music, and I also consult to other people in the industry. I'm consultant to the ABC at the moment with regards to a TV series that they're doing, and I work with people from Bombora on that. And I'm in a position now where I enjoy doing what I'm doing as much as I did before, but I get to choose my projects, and I have a bit of time to myself as well. So
exactly,
I don't do. It's not a 70-hour week now; it's just a 40-hour week.
70 hours, exactly. I don't even know how you managed to function on the amount of sleep that you had, darling. Now, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on this show, and congratulations once again on receiving the Ted Albert Award for Outstanding Services to Australian Music.
Thank you very much for having me, Annie.
Thanks.
Lovely talking to you.
Yeah, thanks.